Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to another discussion here on Unicorn Overlord. With the last video, I was talking about how personally I thought that the difficulty is in basically a perfect place, at least as perfect as it can be, in Unicorn's case here. Essentially being a situation where they managed to kind of just hit that sweet spot between just kind of having fun things to build, fun things to do, while still, adding enough of a challenge to be a bit of a challenge to folks that are familiar with various aspects of the stuff that it was inspired by, while still not being completely uncompletable. I feel like a lot of the very angry complaints and things that ended up coming up from some folks saying that stuff like TZ mode was too easy or whatnot, maybe came from a place of wanting to show off. I don't know. Um, but either way, as far as the team building challenge, all of that kind of thing, there were comments on the last video essentially mentioning that, hey, maybe your experience is being partially colored by the fact that you were sequence breaking. Maybe the third island is just considerably more challenging than the rest, and so it feels a bit more right. So what I wanted to do was a little bit of a test here. So I was playing around with a bunch of stupid builds to begin with, and by the way, this should be the total opposite of what Legman was doing in terms of don't steal this build because it's stupid. But I like to call this one the Scorpion. It's essentially just three thieves in front, as well as the Death Pillar, using a combination of the Death Pillar as well as a Carnelian and the Acrobat shoes to make a Wyvern Knight that insta kills anything that's poisoned, and then all of the thieves go out and poison everything. But a lot of stuff is just immune to insta kill, so it's not exactly that useful. But it's had its shining moments. But specifically, what I wanted to do here was that I wanted to see what the challenge would look like after I'd gone and basically completed the rest of the island here. B, how it would feel after I kind of re-optimized teams a little bit, and then C, what it would feel like after going to that third island. Was there really this big, easy, sudden, just momentum shift that completely crushed everything? And personally, I gotta say, I'm still sticking with that original opinion of it's balanced as it should be. See, again, right now this is on expert, and again, please bear in mind that if you were of the opinion that it was too easy to, I get where you're coming from. I get it. Once you optimize a game hard enough, stuff gets easy. But that's why I usually recommend things like challenge runs. See, the point of challenge runs isn't necessarily for the purpose of always just like adding arbitrary rule sets for the sake of it being harder. It's for the purpose of making you interact with different mechanics. It's to kind of explore stuff that you otherwise wouldn't have explored. It's why I'm looking forward to, for example, going through stuff like TZ mode using just basic soldiers, or stuff like that, because there's a lot of tech just in terms of the equipment, in terms of the different synergies that even just one class can do. Single class challenges are going to be absolutely enthralling in this one. But the game actually does have a lot of checks and balances that I don't see getting discussed as much. For example, what I'm trying to show in the clip in the background here is that if you send an entire squad of flyers, they will actually adjust where they're sending units to compensate for that. They actually will intercept them with scouts. I'm not entirely sure how the triggers work, but I was noticing consistently that when I was trying this whole flyer bum rush approach, then yeah, they were regularly rerouting scouts to go deal with the mob of flyers. If you send one individual flyer, they won't pay attention to it as much. And like, this isn't an overly the kind of mentality that often comes up there is like, oh well, that's an oversight. A real player would have known to pay attention to that, but it's an intentional design decision. It's how you get that whole kind of story narrative kind of dealy going, where it's like, oh, we sent in these groups over here being stealthy, and we sent in these groups over here, in a bit more of a mob formation. We intentionally redirected them over here. It's how you get that without like outright adding stealth and whatever else mechanics. It's like a fun little redirection thing. And even one of the things that I saw over creating a quote unquote invincible squad, there's a lot of different ways that this can play out in different situations. You bring the right counters to the right situations, and yeah, you'll eventually have stuff that can counter stuff pretty darn well. In fact, on maps like this, that's basically what I was relying on. And I know, like, the way that I handled this particular one was very, very scuffy. And frankly, that's okay because this is, my first playthrough on Expert. And once we get to TZ, it's going to be a completely different approach. But still, all of these mechanics being in place, like that just fills me with a whole ton of hope as far as runs for the future go. Now, as far as other checks and balances and things go, let's actually discuss the reroll system here real quick. It's not really a reroll system; it's just the shuffle system. Because that was another thing that I saw a whole lot of very loud screaming about. That I think this might be getting misunderstood. So when you're moving units around, you're not like infinite re-rolling RNG or what have you. Effectively, what's happening whenever you're shuffling units around is that they're basically just shooting from different angles or just kind of redoing the entire scenario based on where they are now. Like the actual numbers are already set once the encounter happens. So, like the notion that I've seen that you can infinitely reroll until every fight is a win is no, that's not how that works at all. Because, well, frankly, in a lot of cases, you just simply won't have a win there. Or, more interestingly, you will have a kind of partial win going on. So, like, one of the things that can happen, and oftentimes will happen, is like, let's say a team is about to get completely steamrolled, and if you move stuff around just enough, maybe somebody will find a way to dodge from a different angle or what have you, and you'll find yourself in a position where you've technically gotten a win. You've basically won for that second, but at that point, you're still potentially running into a scenario where you now have to rework the entire party because they can't take another hit. They can't really go and set up another attack. So what do you do? How do you compensate? Who do you send out to go buy time for them to recover, or what items do you use to go block the way to give them a chance to come back to life and all that? It's just a fun equation. So, like as far as I'm concerned, that stuff's just pretty darn cool. Now, okay, so this particular attempt on dealing with the big one in Baxtoria's here was trying to see if items could be used to cheese out enough kills on these guys to get a bunch of points to be able to use mercenaries to push on forward. Um, the interesting thing that comes up here is the fact that they will constantly send out massive streams of units, and most of them are going to be completely different team comps that require different stuff to be dealt with. So, like, let's say the scouts. I have the Beast Slayer squad that's up there with Lane's team there, with a what was it, silver something bow, just basically the Beast Slayer bow, on a high priority Unify there. In order to hopefully essentially shut off a lot of their abilities before they get a chance to do stuff, because the Beast Slayer bonus effectively counteracts their benefits here, where it reduces a lot of their points, but specifically only works against them. Now, against these guys, I get it; they're like lycanthropes and things. It's a little bit weird that there's elf versions, because that kind of feels a little racist. But anyway. Which, by the way, I do say that as a joke. Somebody got a little upset last time I was joking about that. They're like fantasy creatures. It's a common trope in these things. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Anyway, so yeah, in this particular thing, I was just seeing if we could use that particular method to build up enough points to just kind of momentum steamroll through this thing. But if you don't get aggressive right from the get-go, you get a bunch of, well, craziness like that. You just basically get completely overwhelmed because they will keep sending this tide of meat. And even with units that are specifically made to counter them, they're going to have a hard time. And this is what I was mentioning earlier about the fact that they'll actually reroute some of those scouts and werewolves and things to go deal with your bullshit if you try to sneak through enough units. So they will actually attempt to surround and stuff like that. And then I was very happy to find more chickens to hunt down. So that was the kind of pre anything approach. So it was a little bit of a rough time there. Um, so I didn't have the entire island cleared out yet. I didn't go back to find more items for the team. So there was just a general lack of items. There were people with, empty item slots and things because there just weren't enough to go around because of the whole sequence break situation. Anyway, so I went back, I cleared out the island, and then I attempted to go for another go here, attempting to use more of a combination of various types of cavalry and whatnot. But even with things like guard call, attack call, and things like that, even when we were spending a lot of points, they still ended up taking just enough chip from a lot of different attacks that it was giving them a hard time actually sustaining anything. One of the big things that you notice in this entire region is that you'll oftentimes get cut down when you're in the middle of some big move, and then suddenly have to reroute. And stuff like going and doing grind maps or whatever else doesn't necessarily help that much. Mostly, what I was doing here was trying to get a little bit of extra money, as well as training up some new units to try out some new ideas. And I don't know if anybody else does this, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure it's a fairly normal experience. But whenever there's an issue with a fight, oftentimes I'll just go and do one of the trial fights over and over, just to kind of sort of quickly brainstorm some ideas. Just like, I know that by the time I'm done thinking of something, that there's going to be additional stuff available. Any darn ways. I love this combo, by the way, the Archer and Werebear combo, which that one, I really love the final version that I'm up to in the game at this point of that. It just feels really good. Also, the fact that it ends by the end of the build I'm currently working on, essentially two arrow rains, one at the start of the fight, one at the end, and then you just got the bears just getting hyped up as all hell for this just hellfire from the sky. But yeah, it feels good. You got the ice, you got the stun, you got the shooties, you got the accuracy. It's good. It's just good stuff. And if anything isn't finished off, Arrow Rain, make sure that job's done. Anyway, so yeah, I went around optimizing the teams a little bit. Would just go do an attempt, would see a problem, would then go collect more treatises to either use or sell, and then yeah, would go through and do another attempt here. Yeah, those kind of trial maps are really handy for things like going in with a high evasion squad and then just using plunder on an entire group of enemies while the cavalry runs around to go get the win. It just gives you a whole bunch of options in terms of just buying out every store that you run into. Which, as far as I'm concerned, that's not easy. That's how RPGs are played. I guess that was one of those other kind of awkward bits of discourse that I've seen that just like, technically, if you can grind things, then and or break things, that it makes the game broken. But like, that's the point of RPGs. I mean, this was understood back in the even back when RPGs were first starting. It's actually funny to see those old conversations where they were talking about things like what the hell was it? It was basically a Japanese response to seeing wizardry and stuff like that, where they had this response of like, well, we love seeing how strong you can get in these RPGs, so we want to invent JRPGs now to go even more nutty with that. So okay, so this got me to this point right here. So one of those comments I saw come up a couple of times is that the sequence break was maybe throwing off my perspective in terms of the difficulty because maybe there was more happening there. So what I did was I went over to the elf spot there because for this playthrough I was trying to get Elaine hitched with Chloe there, and one of her scenes to make that happen is over in the elf island. So figured, screw it, two birds, one stone. We'll see what's going on down here. So I want to point out a couple of things. Even with a preposterous level advantage, like we're talking more than twice their level in a lot of cases, it's not that they can't land hits, and you'll notice more and more as we go through this island, they can still actually finish off units in the right situations. Now, this is, again, a basically beginning of the game area. And again, by the actual complete end of it, there are cases where there is still a legitimate challenge for the teams that are built here. Again, not perfectly optimized for every possible situation and meta and whatever else out there. But the maps still remained interesting. The fights, if we were at a even remotely close level, would be dramatically more difficult. So yeah, as far as the whole Delph Island thing here goes, even curb stomping it was fun. And bear in mind, again, we absolutely curb stomped this. This was a hilarious little spin around here. Just basically a massive item collection journey. It's like from the entire perspective of this island, effectively this dude just rolls in one day, comes out of the forest, throws out an entire army, and then rebuilds all of the cities within like 3 days. So that's just really funny from a from an RPG perspective to me. Oh man, like that's just hilarious. But yeah, all the same, million different units over here. Even a squad that's going to take no damage here is still going to get bogged down and things like that. I was curious how the numbers were looking like, and sure enough, they were getting completely, thoroughly steamrolled. Actually, one thing that I find funny is these shielded archers. I actually didn't end up ever getting a hold of one of these until way, 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 way after this. I was kind of expecting that this is the spot where they would kind of be in their sort of pre-evolution form, so to speak. But yeah, didn't. I actually don't know whether arbalesters are their original form or if shielded archers are a different version or what. I just know that the only time I've gotten a single one of those was after completing all of Baxtoria, so that was kind of interesting to see because I was looking for arbalesters for a while. Though I like that design decision because the mercenaries are arbalesters, presumably as a reference to the what the hell were they? The crossbows that got their like shit rocked at Agincourt. What the hell were they? How am I forgetting? The Genoese crossbows. There we go. Anyway, so man, like if we didn't have a preposterous advantage, this fight would be ridiculous. Like we got ballistas going off everywhere. We got healing rains going off everywhere. We got smoke getting shot out for support units. They're coming in with like 5 times our numbers. I mean, this would be again a fascinating fight at that same level. And from what I've heard of TZ, I actually went ahead and finally looked up what it is. Like that's frankly, this spot's gonna be awesome for that difficulty there. Um, Basically, from what I've seen, it's kind of sort of permadeath, where units more or less just get benched if their entire squad gets taken out, but you can still bring them back with the equivalent of Cornash, that there are no Cornash functions whatsoever, that they're replaced with that revival item, more or less, which to me sounds absolutely perfect. Essentially, we can't use a point cheese to get through it. But I'm getting a little bit off topic here. So, I ended up picking up one of these guys just to have them for the Pokedex, more or less, but like, I don't think I'm ever going to end up using one. They're just sort of there now. And yeah, on we went. So mostly the takeaway that I got from going through this Elf Island as a second location here was, yeah, it would have been really cool if it's scaled up. Personally, I feel like, okay, it's very difficult to say, like, difficulty-wise, how anything should be, because RPGs are notoriously crazy as far as getting anything to be balanced goes. Oftentimes, just not messing with something is usually the best response. Um, I see any game development or any mod development or anything like that, for that particular example there. Just like you end up tweaking one item and suddenly the entire game has shifted or whatnot. But a lot of the difficulty discussion that I've seen was typically complaining about being able to steamroll maps with one squad or something like that. And again, to me, as far as I've seen, even in cases where you are extremely overpowered, not only is it still satisfying, you still need multiple squads just to hit multiple objectives at one time. Even at the end of, even at multiple locations here, you still need people defending. You still want folks going and claiming like side objectives and things. Or in some cases, you need at minimum 4 squads to even have a map be possible. And even here, again, despite the fact that these guys are way, way, way higher level, they're still taking losses every now and then. So if they end up hitting the right counters, they will still end up taking losses. And considering that this isn't even the highest difficulty yet, that again just tells me that yes, it is balanced exactly as it should be. This was all thought out and intentional. However, if they do add a higher difficulty, and personally I think that they'll probably end up tweaking the TZ difficulty at some point for just to maybe address some of the stuff that got said. Because whenever, like when we had the demo out and stuff like that, there was a lot of discussion over the fact that it was maybe a bit too hard for newcomers, and immediately, with the first patch, they ended up throwing out the ultra easy mode for the journalists to go complain that it was nothing but a phone game. Yeah, that's annoying. Anyway. Oh man, you hate to see it. It's like, here, we made this thing specifically to appeal to you. Oh, I still can't be bothered to play the game, though. Oh man. But yeah, so So upon curb stomping through this area, basically the answer was more or less leave one squad on defense, send out the birds on fast mode to go claim themselves a capital. But still, these maps were cool as hell. I mean, in a lot of cases, they had gimmicks. Is this the one with the? Let's see. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, there's the thief and such coming back. Here. I was skipping ahead a bit. There we go. The Archer and Thief, if you're wondering if they did make a comeback, they do make a comeback. I think they probably fight on the other side if you try to kill them here. Don't know, but either way, two more bodies to leave stationed at various towns or what have you. But even in this particular fight was, it would have been pretty weird in a normal scenario. In fact, actually, if you don't send somebody out to go hunt down the thieves, they will run away with a ton of your money. You can end up being completely broke because they just constantly send thief reinforcements to go steal more and more money from you. Which again, I know that it's a funny little gimmick, but I like that gimmick. You know. Especially the fact that they've got landmines just sitting by the side of the road, where you might probably be chasing them from if you try to go collect that item to the side. It's just clever. Again, just clever design through and through. Even when curb stomping and whatever else, I feel like the design's been very thorough there. And actually, one example that I brought up last time that I feel I didn't elaborate much on, in terms of the difficulty, feeling very similar to this like X Division or something like Long War or whatever else. What feels what it feels like is essentially that yes, if you end up knowing the game in and out, like, if you end up finding, quote unquote perfect builds for every situation, if you end up finding just the right items and whatever else, then as a good RPG should, it will, have options to feel very satisfying as you run around cleaving through everything like it's butter. Like that's that's the whole point of a good RPG or what have you. Like if in something like New Vegas, you never had a problem where that you never had that situation where you became super overpowered, then it would feel very very different by the end, and that's what challenge runs are kind of for. That if you find yourself in that position, that you're feeling feeling a bit overpowered, then just simply depower yourself. It's not meant as a the game needs to have this arbitrary thing to be fun thing. It's just a personal preference thing. If you find yourself in a mode where, okay, the standard difficulty that lets you kind of flex out the mechanics, that lets you experience the world and whatever else isn't challenging enough for you, again, challenge run. Making a specific dedicated difficulty mode to get that same effect is oftentimes not necessarily going to work. And TZ mode, from what I've seen, is about as good as you can probably get in that particular regard, with well, okay, I would say two things would be kind of handy for it. I don't know if they would even help though. Like if you added a full, let's say, scaled difficulty type of situation, you might try to create something more similar to kind of how Jagged Alliance has it, where it's a constantly dynamically changing world state. But the problem is that can be cheesed, and this is something that we saw cheesed extensively for something like Tactics Ogre PSP, where they tried to add this thing where it would adjust its level to yours, and levels are a flawed system in and of themselves, where like it's a good enough kind of solution. Also, I love this attempted counter that we already built for countering that particular counter, but I love that there's a straight shot with your cavalry and they immediately have a cavalry ambush squad in the woods. Oh man, but yeah, there's so many initiative attacks on that particular squad that they're not going to have much of a shot. Anyway, so the thing with levels is, again, if you try to simply raise the level, those levels become the player's levels. They will find a way to cheese a few fights, just like I did with the sequence break in this one, that even though they were like 20 levels higher once you go straight to Baxtorius there, it didn't really particularly matter. You can still cheese them. Like, you could basically wound several squads with traps and things, go in and finish them off, which then allows for conveniently dealing with those trial maps, which then basically powers up the entire party very quickly. That all it's really doing is adding an awkward bump along the road, more so than making something actually genuinely more difficult in that scenario. So the levels themselves, unless they would be constantly scaled up and down, wouldn't necessarily always do the job. And in a sort of medium scale SRPG, like when Tactics Ogre Reborn got remade, that ended up working just fine. That there were, maximum 12 being deployed on each side. You could have everybody at roughly the same level, and the counterplays became very important there. In something like this, maybe it would work. I don't know. But the problem is, again, that it could be cheesed. If you make a dynamically adjusted system, like they have the whole open world thing going on. If like right now they are set for the difficulty that they should be at, and that feels good. Can you go take higher level things and then go back for lower level things? Sure, it feels pretty darn good to do still. And that's basically what we're seeing on screen right now, that it feels really nice to be able to just clear map after map after map after map after map and just rapidly recolonize the entire continent within a matter of days. Again, it's silly. It's not realistic, but it's fun. Like, RPGs generally don't tend to be realistic. They tend to be realistic enough to be believable, but then also let you have the whole power fantasy thing going on, and that feels good. But the reason that I said it was similar to a lot of XCOM mods there is again just the fact that if you have the right counters, you can feel confident in your ability to go and accomplish certain things. So like if you have good like let's say flyer squads or whatever else, you can feel fairly confident in a lot of cases that if you give them enough alpha strike potential, that they would be able to go dive bomb something on the other end of the map. The problem then is the logistics of making that happen, where like let's say you still have to use your infantry or cavalry, whatever else, to hold everything else off in these various fights here. Like defensive teams would still be necessary. If you, let's say, even if you're doing well in the fights, you might be running out of resources, on the overworld or whatever else. So there's more than just directly winning a single fight and the entire experience is broken. Um, but yeah, by the way, that thief and wyvern squad, it rarely does anything useful, but it's fun when it does. It's just a completely pointless gimmick team. But again, it's just the fun of building here, and I was kind of curious why they were doing so poorly in terms of damage. Also, apparently, he was having a really hard time recording that one for some reason. What the hell? Well, that's super weird. Anyway, let's skip past this then, if it's going to have that much difficulty. Yeah, kind of an imperfect recording system here. Are you going, or are you just struggling to play this many files at once? I mean, I did ask this app to play 367 clips at one time, so, so there's that. Um, but again, having perfectly balanced like hardcore modes or whatever else would render a lot of things completely impractical. Like right now, let's say there's a lot of situations where let's say with this kind of like a helicopter dropship build that I got going on here, where it's like flyers and cavalry and mercenaries to basically land in a location, take out whatever towers are nearby, drop a bunch of mercenaries, and then charge the boss. Um, I think it's okay. Yeah, I think it's because I was trying to record several clips back to back that it was struggling so hard here. That was freaking weird. Huh. All right. Well, ignore the scuffy visuals. I don't know what's going on with that. I think it was just a Steam Deck being a Steam Deck issue. What's funny is that these things will typically run high-end games just fine, but if you try to ask it to do too many files at one time, they get really confused. Apparently, it's some kind of Linux thing. Like I guess they're just min-maxed for performing for games and stuff like that, and multitasking they kind of suck at. So when you ask it to play 300 things at one time, it gets a little bit upset. Anyways, so let's get back to it here. So so as far as making like an ultra hard mode, one of the things that I saw thrown around was this idea of just raising levels across the board. So I already mentioned that, yeah, those levels would just become the players' levels. It would be a minor roadblock, and then would just kind of fuck with the balance otherwise. That it wouldn't necessarily help with anything. It would just potentially add more points to the pool. which yeah, that leads to issues. It's kind of like how with Tactics Ogre Reborn, how you typically have to throw a lot of charms at your monster units if you want to bring them into the post game, because of the higher numbers across the board lead to a situation that well, essentially those particular units that specifically need a stat to function have a much harder time doing so. In all other ways, they're fine. But when it comes to anybody that is specifically stat dependent, that kind of stuff would get kind of messed up pretty darn quick. Now, anyways, so as I mentioned before, even when you're kind of hyper overpowered here, there are still going to be cool maps going on. Like this one to me felt like it reminded me of this moment playing playing Morrowind back in the day, which I know a lot of things are reminding me of that because they're fine with letting you get overpowered, but it leads to kind of interesting situations when you go back to earlier areas where you really just kind of feel how far the team has come, you know? Like in this particular case, I'm already seeing that like if this was the team that went into Ware Canada to begin with, they would have been having a real damn hard time right now holding these locations, getting fired on by support fire and whatever else. A lot of their items are allowing them to cleave through these guys without taking a whole lot of counter damage, and they're still taking chip. They still can't go and take on the entire map at once. You know, they still can't carve through absolutely everything, and we've even achieved like 5-man squads at this point. We are outnumbering them. We're essentially outclassing them in every possible way, and still there are limitations. So either way, that just feels good. Also, at this point, I probably should have taken the opportunity to go use plunder a whole bunch on those guys that kept trying to cross the bridge, but oh well. Anyway, I really love the design of this map, though. The general idea is that every time you claim an area, you end up raising up a platform to go let everybody else get across, and eventually, once you get the entire place connected, you get the barrier to come down. So it's just a fun little puzzle map. I feel like this area was completely full of them. And there we go. One of our squads that was holding up in Ware Canada is again getting their ass kicked by this random squad over here guarding a bridge. Because again, counters are still existing. It's not the Ace Flyer squad or anything. It's the Freezy Bird squad, but still, like just the fact that they can still get taken out at this point. And again, this is still not the hardest difficulty. Tells me that yeah, no, they thought this stuff through. This feels like it was properly designed to be a good mix of flexing the mechanics, still making you think, but still giving you that nice feeling of hitting stuff pretty darn hard, you know? Anyways, so the problem that comes from, like, let's say a full-scaled difficulty in something like this is that it would probably take away from a lot of that satisfying feeling of of occasionally having those big power spikes, of having those big push-through moments. Because even when a game is going for that whole proper immersive experience, that is still part of said immersive experience. Like, think about Deus Ex, right? Um, One of those ones that's typically held up as like the ultimate immersive sim and what have you. Where in its case, right at the very beginning, you feel like an absolute chump. Everything can take you out like nothing, and by the end, you're basically a Terminator. And that progression is important. It's what gives it that really nice feeling that you know that there's no slog here. That you're not, even when you get stuck, you know that there's something satisfying on the other side. That you know that there's kind of that sort of dopamine hit to go and work towards. You know. But again, everything is always context, though. So, like in a game like this, it's clear that every bit of its design was inspired from the stuff that ended up being a little bit frustrating back in the ogre battle games, like that shuffling mechanic. Every ogre battle player that you'll talk to will probably tell you that that thing's basically a dream come true, because as much as there's that discussion going on over like, oh, you know, you can just re-roll your bullshit over and over, and it's the ultimate meta strategy, and it's not, dude. The numbers are already baked in once you get there. You can reposition people to give them a better shot of achieving certain things, and yeah, if you move somebody to another spot, technically they will re-roll their odds for different things, but everything re-rolls. It's not all in your favor, and a lot of times stuff goes wrong. That's where we get stuff like the damage going down from assist fire, which they actually do a pretty good job through the little mini tutorials of showing you what's going on there. Where specifically it'll be cases like, let's say, you suddenly got wiped out from an archer squad. Maybe one of them ended up damaging a berserker to the point that some of their abilities now do more damage. Same thing with werebears. Maybe with your cavalry, there were those situations where one of them ended up getting a crit on one of their AP boosting moves, and now they suddenly have multiple actions. That it's not as simple as just re-rolling until all the numbers land, that there is a mechanical reason for it all to happen. And in some cases, you're just repositioning people in a direction that they didn't expect. Like, it's still simulating all of them taking their turns and things like that. There's still going to be those cases where units are simply going to be, let's say, finishing off one guy early and getting a lot more momentum for it. Or potentially somebody else will end up triggering a 1 HP survival ability or something, and then end up completely steamrolling you in another one. And having that ability to essentially say, no, look, we built for this. It sucks that it didn't deploy in this particular situation. Can I just move this guy over here? It's basically you being your own DM, so to speak. It's that discussion that people have in tabletop games. I'm just like, look, like, can I just roll for a chance to save this? Because I have this exact thing. I brought it with me. I was thinking about my like electric bill being due, and I forgot to go put it out there. Can I just roll for a chance to save it? And it's like, yeah, sure. Would you like to maybe have your people attack from like a foot more over there, or maybe they've got a good angle on this guy over here. That guy staring at that guy, and his neck was exposed for this archer over here, something like that. Again, it's getting that same tabletop feel going on here. So to my mind, and again, I'm really looking forward to doing TZ mode. My first kind of quote unquote proper let's play thingy of this one is going to be in that mode because I want to do it that way. And from what I've seen of it, it sounds like about as perfect of a difficulty as you can get for a system like this that doesn't break anything, that still keeps the satisfying parts of the system while still letting you, flex the stuff that you've learned along the way without forcing you to rely on meta builds. I mentioned this before, but like, let's say, actually, one thing I want to point out here: creative use of the map. They actually do this quite a bit. But in this particular place, you got the healing rain ability that's there to heal up your dudes and whatnot. But at the same time, here it's used in an interesting contextual way, where you can use it to put out forest fires as one of the side objectives of the map here. That if the fire reaches the tree, you get a game over. But you can use you can essentially just use the rain ability to keep the fire in check. It's such a cool creative use of this whole thing. And you see this all the frickin' time. Like, just absolutely top-notch design going on here. I love it. Anyway, so the issue with meta builds. So obviously this depends by game as far as whether it's an actual problem or it isn't. Like, we saw this for, like, in TOR, there were a lot of folks that were insisting, no, summoner meta, summoner meta. And that still had a lot of asterisks to it. You still had to get those abilities in the first place. You had to have somebody that actually could sustain it. And frankly, having an entire team built with just stabs to go force feed MP into somebody so that they could use one ability over and over and hope that it rolled high enough to be able to kill everything was boring enough that it realistically just kind of balanced itself, that it was just more fun to play it properly. Or in the case of Fire Emblem, they had the sort of marriage meta, and this was especially true on Awakening, which I know I make fun of Awakening a lot, but like, for what it's worth, on a design level, that game did exactly what it needed to save the series, but also like challenge running that thing was super bizarre. Because like it basically just became like, which death dot are you using to get all of your 000 encounters? Anyway, yeah, it's like you just basically went from getting insta wipes to having literal just invincibility very very suddenly over the course of getting hitched. Interesting game. Anyway, so what I'm getting at here is we still don't have the complete death dot. There are certain hard counters, sure, but typically maps will still send out counters to those counters. They'll have interesting side objectives. There still will be more stuff going on. And I feel like a lot of those comments that I've seen may have been coming from a place of of like looking at the little side maps and things, and just kind of considering them as the main bulk of the game, which they're just kind of little extra, kind of cookie crumbs along the way. Um, like those side maps are literally meant to be completed in like 3 seconds. They're there is like, here's this gimmick and maybe a weird. Okay, they're kind of like a mini tutorial in a way. I mentioned this last time, but like, where where like in Baxtoria, there was one where you maybe weren't paying attention to the owl's kind of secondary effect on its ability there, where it not only let you see things, which it taught you in a previous map, but it also was doing something like extending assist range. So they just had an entire map that's just like, here's a bunch of assist fires. Here's this one owl that triggers the ability from the very beginning. Look, isn't this cool? Would you like to kill them now? And that was good. It's satisfying. it's nice. Also, I appreciate that the guy setting the fires is doing that with a fire weapon. That's just a neat little touch. Gotta always have an affably evil guy with the with a fire spear, as it does. I will say one thing that does really bug me about the game so far is just how many times people run away. They do it quite a bit. In fact, it was really striking in this particular scenario that this guy ran off and got betrayed by his people. Remember that scenario for like 10 minutes from now. Also, a little. I think there is different dialogue here if you had Chloe talk to him before, because I forgot to actually test this when I was going and steamrolling this place. I plan to do that on the next playthrough. But yeah, so so yeah, that dude gets betrayed by his own soldiers because they're tired of a pointless fight, and then we kind of move on to here. Was this the one with the towers? I don't. No, this is the one with that small town. Yeah, we just kind of rush into a, well, basically destroyed capital kind of sort of situation here. It's one of their bigger towns, despite being a surprisingly small town. Um, Actually, another little side note: the repairs. So the severity of damage to each of these cities has actually been represented in the stuff, not necessarily the stuff specifically, but in the number of steps required to repair them. Like, it was kind of cool seeing the final bit of Bistorius there, where you get to their actual like secondary capital kind of thing, and the guy that was taking over had actually built it up because he was trying to actually do the whole king thing. And so it was actually completely repaired once you get there. I went to go repair it, and it's like, no, no, dude, we're fine. We don't need any fixing. Whereas stuff like here got completely pillaged, so they actually need fixing up, or the stuff closer to your spot over there is pretty much completely thrashed. But it's a neat little kind of storytelling touch that we see there. And again, support fire still hurting these guys, even though they have that kind of magic shielding, courtesy of their divine knight here. Um, Man, those Doom Knights look goofy, but they're goofy in an interesting way. Oh man, yeah. One of the things I did see going through this area was that I kept not having the local stuff to complete building stuff up. So it was just a complete beeline to go and save as many places as possible to go get more materials, to then go back and take care of the rest of those places. But it's just interesting that you can clear an entire continent in like an hour if you're going back to it this way. This was a later side quest. Basically, just like, here's this Giga Boss. If you can kill it in one round, you get cool weapons and stuff like that. So far, we could not. So, that's a thing for later. Ah, that's good coffee. But yeah, this one was all cavalry and clerics and things like that, so probably needed more initial AoE attacks. Actually, come to think of it, I think I have the perfect thing for this. And then we got some backstory on a guy that totally isn't Elaine, that's his dad and such. Interestingly tragic backstory on the kind of bad guy of this particular area. But, she was more or less a kind of they keep calling her his personal witch and things like that. But I believe that the term that they were going for here is a side piece. But yeah, her whole life ends up completely falling apart in that particular endeavor there. And we finally get to see more stuff going on between these two. Force fed them cake back at the very beginning of the game to go max out their rapport, and then they've just been awkwardly kind of staring at each other from a distance in the same squad ever since. There's basically no point in force feeding them so much cake and spending a atrocious amount of money to do so, considering that they've been in the same squad for a while now. But this is one of those cool kind of role playing things that this entire system just kind of allows. Because you got these two that, are basically a previously engaged couple and stuff like that. And so you want them to get along, okay? And if it was essentially if it was an FEA type of situation, then they would end up getting overpowered or end up getting dead. Uh, if it was a situation where stuff needed to be in ultra hardcore mode all the time, then maybe you wouldn't necessarily use them on the same squad anymore because they need to set up some meta thing in order to even survive. But when you have higher difficulties that, again, still manage to challenge while still giving you that flexibility to do your whole RPG thing, we instead have what I was referring to as the therapy squad, where we've got Philippe, my main knight guy, that's at the middle of the party, and he was always in between them because he was mediating. They were kind of at each other's throats, and he was mediating. Now that they're together, now the two of them are next to each other in the squad, and they got a Doom Knight because it's funny, and also they got a Gladiator because they needed a meat wall. But okay, so then we get to one of the bigger fights in the elf area here. This is one of the ones that required taking a whole bunch of places at once. But like, look at this. You've got the locals that are going to get their shit rocked in just a moment here. We've got two different headquarters to go and defend. We got to take three different locations on this map that I haven't quite figured out yet. They're going to keep sending reinforcements to all these different locations, and all of it is paced out very similarly to a lot of RTS scenarios. Where it's just giving you a lot of things to pay attention to at one time, that you want to potentially use some disposable trash units to go deal with less important objectives and things like that. So again, the Lobies still have their place. It isn't just the big meta ultimate Chad squad, because you're still limited on the number of items you can get. You're still limited on who can use those items where. Counters will still apply, and maps will oftentimes have interesting gimmicks where units will still struggle. Again, this is the squad that was doing fine in Baxtoria, and they're still taking losses over here in a far easier area. I'm not saying that this is, completely perfect, but considering that they are like outrageously overpowered, just the fact that they can still take losses is honestly a good sign to me. And it is, that this stuff has been thought through. And if somebody ends up getting stuck and ends up getting bogged down, like the equation that I've seen thrown around is like, well, you can get so many kills, and then you get your you get stuff like vitalize, and then you just barely break even on points, and then they just can keep on going forever. And yeah, that's still one squad in one place. It has its place to be fun in its particular way, and to use that successfully is very satisfying. Like, it feels good. At the same time, I could make the exact same argument for what the strategy that I end up using on a lot of these maps, which was the life aid and heal combo. That just, you have a death dot of a lot of various different types of squads that swap in for each other, and then effectively farm up points by being more or less immortal. And again, that's just clever use of existing skills. That's not broken. That's not badly designed. That's good RPG design. That you retain the ability to be overpowered under the right circumstances, but there's still enough pushback from the game to still give you a reasonable challenge. The reason that I mention this is, again, to compare it with what we've seen from Ogre Battle and what we've also seen from Tactics Ogre in this particular regard, because again, very kind of similar close range combinations there. Where in, let's say, something like Tactics Ogre PSP, you had the infinite grind potential to be truly overpowered to the point that nothing could actually touch you, and it led to a situation that most folks would never touch the post game. And when TOR came out, it's one of the things that they addressed, and suddenly people started really appreciating the post game. They started seeing content that they never would have touched before. Basically, 2/3 of the game, actual lengthwise, was behind a wall of, technically you can just become completely broken in the story mode and then just nothing can touch you. But then it also was met with this immediate difficulty spike that they attempted to deal with it using just levels before, which basically meant that in both directions, nobody touched that particular thing. So either way, what I'm trying to get at here is that we didn't see that situation here so far. Again, this is the first kind of side area that you can go to, and they will still be taking losses. They're still getting units taken out by the boss here. They've still got bosses that are able to use interesting gimmicks, and you later claim those gimmicks for your own. This is just good RPG design, man. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at how Ogre Battle handled this because it did feel very similar. Actually, a lot of the tricks that this game uses are stuff that OB64 in particular had done before. And a lot of the design decisions that are here are again stuff that we've seen explored in those games. Like, for example, we see the stat item limit. That stat items are generally pretty rare, but the stat item limit does create a situation where even on the higher end, there's only certain amounts that you can potentially use there. There's only a certain amount of like proper full stat bonus items. And from what I understand, folks have found ways to cheese additional items and what have you, which is fine. From what I understand, that stuff is hidden in the last area of the game, which, yeah, if you can get to it, then you should be rewarded for being able to get to it. I mean, it's not exactly an easy process to get there. Um, like if you find a cheesy way to do something, good. That's your reward. I don't know what to tell you. Sometimes you're gonna get prizes for being good at a game. Who knew? Okay, so let's see. So yeah, like in Ogre Battle's case, they tried a thing with Anywhere Jack. Basically, that you could buy stat items, like you could get them randomly with every town that you captured, but or with especially through cards and things, like your stats were constantly flying all over the place. But you had a guy that was a rare, just random thing that would appear somewhere, because for context, March of the Black Queen, every item and things like that were completely random. It was basically designed as a board game that it was, you were pulling cards from the pile, as it were. In fact, that's very from what I've heard. That's actually what Unicorn Overlord's board game feels like. Anyway, so anyways, your items were completely random, but if you got a token to summon Anywhere Jack, you could buy stat items, and on any map you could just sit there, take infinite reputation loss for the purpose of generating infinite money, because every day that you spent on a map you generated more income, which was cool from a simulation perspective because the locals were getting pissed that you were taxing them while you were oppressing them, and in lore the way that it was supposed to work was that yeah, you were just kind of extorting the locals while you were there, but if you were only there a few days, they were happy with you. Your reputation would go up, that they were happy that you liberated their cities and stuff like that. You stay too long, you overstay your welcome. Okay? You have to spend money to deploy your soldiers, you have to spend money to go equip your soldiers and things like that. By which I mean mostly just consumables, because everyone just got one item that they could carry. But still, it was this cool, this kind of cool simulation thing, and it specifically billed itself as the ultimate simulation RPG, which was kind of interesting because it gets considered a RTS clone these days. It's like the simulation thing was accurate. Anyway, off topic once again. I know, what a shocker. But when Ogre Battle 64 came around, they wanted to address some of those things, because the infinite money exploit meant that if you left your game running on the first map of the game, you completely could bypass the money system. And then if you just found this Anywhere Jack item, which you probably would, you now had an infinitely powerful squad that would simply beeline towards the objective. That the fastest movement type in the game was, well, effectively, for most situations, flyers were the fastest thing in the game. They could get around walls. They could, because walls were still a mechanic. They could get around walls. They could fly over water, and they were way, way, way faster than walking. So technically, the fastest was swimming, but flying was just generally the best overall. So what you would do is you would kind of achieve the dream squad there by finding a dream crown to go promote your any random Amazon into a princess. You would then put a griffin in their team, and then effectively just go with a lich or whatever the hell else you wanted for the rest of your slots. Like princess, lich, and griffin pretty much could annihilate more or less everything in the game. And then once you ended up getting those stat items, they would end up reaching the objective before anything could even touch your home base. So you literally only needed one squad if you got everything set up properly. Which, obviously, that's not ideal. And it's what folks have been trying to describe as going on in this game, which, no. I'm sorry, but no. Like, I'm sure once you achieve certain builds in the way, like, late areas or something like that, then you might be able to achieve that effect, because it is an end game build arriving at the end game that theoretically could be sequence broken to something a bit sooner, which is, again, just good design. That should be there. It's a difficult to reach thing, and if you find ways to play the RPG good, then good. That is your reward. you know? Anyway, so when OB64 came around, they wanted to address this. So you no longer had a kind of deploy cost limit. You could just deploy your soldiers, but you spent your money on training. The longer that you went on in the game, the more expensive stuff became at shops. So if you wanted to get the best stuff, like if you wanted to get basically like the frickin' apocalypse spell for your casters in chapter 1 there, if you speed ran the thing, you ended up getting a lot of those options available to you. That they were a lot cheaper in shops and they were actually affordable. In some cases, parts of the map would be cut off. In some cases, the way that you handled the different political situations could have meant that just certain places weren't available to you, certain characters weren't available to you, certain plot events weren't available to you. It was constantly cutting things off in an interesting way because that's what ogre battle games do. But anyway, so yeah, as far as the difficulty went though, theoretically also you could just wait until your 100th birthday and create another infinitely powerful squad. What's funny is that the game would even directly call you out for this, where if you took enough birthdays, past about like 30 or 40 or something like that, everybody just shows up to the birthday party and they're like, we've ruined the world, basically. Like, how have we let this happen? How have we let this go on for so long? like, this is not okay. And you're more or less locked into one of the bad endings. Um, whereas when it came to a lot of the kind of direct balance between your units and whatnot, oftentimes it just came down to whoever got more actions. So one of the ways that they got around randomness in terms of units missing, in terms of stuff like that, was that they would give you use effects in the ogre battle game. So like you had cards back in March of the Black Queen, which would just allow you to interrupt and just lob spells at things at any given opportunity. So, like, let's say a fight's not going your way and you see that it's not going your way, so you give everybody immunity shields, or you give everybody the ability to, or you send a Cupid to go have the entire enemy team go fight amongst themselves instead. It was basically your fuck you button. And yeah, that's like that. It's very handy in a format like this because there are going to be those moments where you have a bad engagement, and if you've prepared for it, then you have a way to deal with it. Again, in this case, this is your squad loadouts and your shuffling. I know I've had moments where I specifically kept an ice axe on my griffin here, because there are those cases where they need to swap in the middle of a sort of sortie there to debuffs. And so the Cavalier would go inflict a stun. Normally I wouldn't even have the ice move on the Griffin, but they would swap out their sweep for an ice hit, and now suddenly they can potentially stun lock up to 3 units. But for everything else, they would just be raw DPS. But this shifting of different units for different roles feels unbelievably satisfying. But it is again an evolution of that card mechanic. In OB64, it was the Pendra mechanic. They kind of half-assed that one, to be honest. The Pendra mechanic in OB64 basically was like, if you survived 3 rounds of combat, you can just win now. You can just use one of these summon spells here to just basically magic machine gun something out of existence. Which, I mean, if they survived that long, they were probably winning anyway, or if you ended up getting the right item, you could basically have it charged right from the get-go, at which point that squad just doesn't lose anymore if you have that thing charged up, and then it's just a matter of waiting. Again, it had interesting stuff, but the main problem was the fact that there was no, quote unquote, fuck you button, which is, again, what the shuffling is doing in this particular scenario. It's doing the same role as the cards, and a more, well, I would say in many ways more satisfying way because you can keep those in pocket abilities like as I mentioned before, like the debuff weapons that you maybe just use for the raw power right from the get go, but then you can switch out for this other move as needed, or you can swap out the way that certain units work, or just like March of the Black Queen, you've got your stuff like your revival items to go get a team just up enough to be able to hopefully survive. In this case, they just got completely rocked. Again, they were doing fine with units 10 levels higher. They still get countered here. So the counters are still doing their job. Also, let's see, one quick interruption here. Okay, so let's see, around this time we are being introduced to these sort of spellblade types. I'm sure they're around somewhere. I don't recall if we had the option to hire them yet. I don't know. Kind of already had a more or less filled out team here. But just the sheer advantage of coming in with full squads and whatever else was never going to get overcome. But as you can tell, again, the 4-man squads are still running its difficulty. The 5-man squads are kind of fine there. So regardless of which direction you go, you're going to have access to that numbers advantage theoretically. At least for the moment. The harder areas still seem to come in with full teams anyway, but that's kind of its own whole story, as it were. So okay, back on the whole difficulty discussion thing. So in OB64's case, as I mentioned before, it basically just became a thing of cheesing items. Also, this was the most pointless clip I've. What was this clip here? Let's stare at nothing for 30 seconds. But yeah, it was basically like item cheesed all day, every day for a lot of those situations. They had a sort of prototype version of a lot of the ideas that Unicorn ended up leaning into. Like for example, if you gave a blessed sword to somebody that was in the back row, they would be able to heal their team and stuff like that. Or if you ended up, giving them an elemental weapon, they would have the ability to cast that element. And again, it was archaic, but it was really cool for the time. Like you could just go and completely retool what somebody was, courtesy of their equipment. The kind of clunky part came from the fact that you specifically had to have those kind of default pieces of equipment on everybody, which was that's a whole other long story. I was a little on the awkward side. Mostly just for promotions and things. It's just like, why can't I promote this guy? They have all the stats and everything else. Oh, you need to, get one specific item from some shop you haven't unlocked yet, because they can't possibly be, be a phalanx without the right helmet. What are you thinking? Like, it's just part of the uniform, man. Get on board. We do things official around here, which is fair. Like, it's one of those mechanics. It's like it's kind of annoying, but it's also just really cool from a lore perspective, or from just a world building perspective. But it's kind of annoying to play out in practice. But at the same time, I also really like the absolute chaos of the menus in Ogre Battle 64 is such a pain to navigate. But then you have those moments where you look at it and you have all your legions off in their own section of the menu, got all your people laid out all over the place. It's like, oh, this is just like a war game setup. This is just neat. you know, it's just a neat little touch there. Um, anyway, so let's get back on track here talking about Unicorn. So one of the things that this game does kind of lack compared to its predecessors, at least in common discussion that I've seen, has been well in terms of the whole story thing. Which I one thing I will note in terms of main plot, sure, absolutely, but there actually are more variations than I think are regularly realized right now. So like I've seen at least one instance of somebody that's a party member that can just end up switching sides. I've seen several cases where there's cutscenes that would play out differently depending on different people that are there. So they mentioned explicitly that one of the things that they wanted to make sure was going on for this game was that you would be able to accomplish everything on a single playthrough if you wanted to. That they were trying not to stress people out, that it was meant to be a very smooth experience. That again, same thing for what we've seen with the overall balance and things like that, where they do give you those, they do give you the fuck you I won button and stuff like that. Like there's there's those options. They do give you a lot of interplay between mechanics that's just really neat to play around, and it does flow exceptionally well. That it's pretty forgiving of mistakes, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. I think that that forgiveness is partially what's getting blamed as far as being, I guess primarily it's mostly a Reddit thing, to be honest. But that whole thing of just being, too easy for my big strategy brain that we get for every single frickin' game that comes out in this genre. It's one of those things that gets a little exhausting at times because it's like it doesn't matter what's out there. I've seen folks saying that that they set all the sliders on Fell Seal to max and it was just still too easy for them. Bullshit. Is all I'm gonna say on that. Like, oh yeah, they came in with endgame equipment and like a 20 level advantage in the frickin' tutorial. Yeah, bullshit. That was too easy for you. I'm not buying that. Like somebody's complaining too much in that situation. Now, granted, this does have its easy moments with the right builds and the right items, but that's just game knowledge. It's the same thing that we see from the Souls games and stuff like that. Where yeah, once you know where to get certain things, how to cheese certain things, like if you're going and playing your Dark Souls and things like that, and it's like, oh yeah, check it out, I can go cheese this dragon. If I go and use this particular strat over here, I can despawn the dragon. I can go get the claymore. I can go, go fight these things over here, lure them off cliffs to go get some items. To then go get my plus 10 before getting to Anor Londo and things like that. Like, yeah, great, good. That's good design. It's easy if you know what to do, and it's potentially, essentially a sign of skill that you know what to do in the first place, which means that, yes, that is your reward for knowing the game. It does not have to give you a colonoscopy because you played good. you know? I feel like some of that is coming from that, like, honestly, I feel like a lot of it is again a little bit suspicious, but from the like FFT 1.3 side of things, which don't get me wrong, I FFT 1.3 is immensely satisfying in terms of once you figure it out, but in terms of just being a you know difficulty mod to recommend to people, it is a purely masochistic experience until you learn to cheese everything. And then what is it once everybody learns how to cheese everything? Oh, it's still too easy because the only way to get through it was to cheese a bunch of really broken things that were broken on design because there was no other way to get through it. It's like that's kind of the fine line that's being ridden there. That you get to the point where it's just like it's a masochistic, just absolute suck fest for the average player, and then for the folks that end up, you know, getting obsessively cheesy about it, it eventually ends up becoming a really long slide, not slide, a really long slog that they eventually get through, and then now that's too easy too. But having dynamic like kind of highs and lows and stuff like that, that's the ticket. Like as far as I see it, that's kind of what they accomplished here. That's the way to do it. That you still get that feeling of being potentially really overpowered. It's still challenging in a normal sense, and it gives you that variety to go through and play it in a lot of different ways. Like I know I'm looking forward to playing it with no promotions and things like that. I know I'm really looking forward to doing like single class challenge runs of basically everything. Um, Also, I feel like this lady's bad days started along that time that she decided to march along in high heels, but whatever. It is what it is. Yeah, she got fired because she let the king die, basically. Um, Also, apparently the elves don't believe in pence. Folks tell me that the stabby spear ladies are supposedly very good. I don't know. I haven't used them. They're just kind of patrolling some random like back alley harbor or something at this point. They are a bit too anime for my liking. It's like, no, I don't want that in my team. Get that the hell out of here. Also, weirdly enough, this lady is hyper flirty with the main character, which is, I'm assuming, why folks get all super simpy for this lady. But that'll always happen. But yeah, she's here to introduce the marriage mechanic, more or less. Let's go ahead and skip a few clips ahead. Um, Now, that little note right there, the whole name of the chapter of or the name of the mechanic of just unicorn and maiden, that immediately raised some red flags. I know that's probably not where they're going. Like immediately upon seeing that, I'm like, hold on, I've seen this story. Are we about to get sacrificed? Do we kind of worry about hunters? Yeah, the original kind of fable of the unicorn and maiden is basically like, oh, here's this unicorn that's basically this vicious murder beast, and it can only be tamed by this random virgin for reasons. And so then they can't hunt this thing without getting horribly gored, and so they finally just decide to, you know, let somebody hanky the panky with a frickin' horse so that they can go and hunt this unicorn and use it for medicinal properties. Like, no thanks. I think every part of that just seems like a bit of a no, but obviously they're just kind of going for a cheeky, nicer version of just look, they're doing the marriage thing in a cooler way. So either way, that's nice. We get a few more random maps in this elf area. I was actually a little bit surprised to see that they actually did have fights going up in the 30s back in the elf lands over here, which made me think that they were going to kind of scale things up based off of where you're at in the game. From what I've seen, this is just set at 30. But it got me thinking about how a scaling mode might work, where, like, let's say every time you completed it, like, let's say for the highest difficulty, every time you completed any map whatsoever, it ended up raising it up by some certain amount or something. And in theory, that sounds like the hyper immersive way to go, the way to give it that campaign feeling. But again, that just feels like it'll still be cheesy, because then you take all the really hard fights immediately, so that they're showing up in the super easy mode, and then you save all the super easy fights for when you're going another way, and then you've created a different meta, where now all of a sudden the meta is this one particular route through the game where you just have to do it this one particular way, and again, it's taking away from expression. So if you give them more levels, you're basically giving the player more levels, and you're diluting the stats to potentially fall out of where they should be. If you try to kind of auto scale the game in something like this, then there's suddenly a path meta, and that sucks. Like in this case, where the quote unquote meta is basically like sequence breaking the game to get advanced stuff early. That's what it should be. That sounds like complete perfection in my eyes, and it sounds like the highest difficulty basically turns off a lot of the cheesy bullshit that you can do, where yeah, items are overpowered, but they're also limited. On easier difficulties, you can cheese your way through simply using items in every scenario. In something like expert, you get just enough to be able to cheese some areas, but the harder fights you still have to figure out a legit way to get through. But then once you get over to TZ, there you're limited to only 5 item uses. You don't have the Cornash functions at all. You have permadeath for your squads. That's I guess more so permanent benching, or semi-permanent benching, I guess is the way to put it. So that's a thing too. Like, also one more thing, I forget if I mentioned this earlier. As far as the RNG rerolls that are happening in a lot of these fights, whenever archers are potentially causing your own damage to get up, like I saw a very passionate rant on Reddit the other day about this. Like, oh, in no universe should being hit more cause somebody to do more damage. It's like that is a direct mechanic on a lot of skills, and one of the skills that the Griffins in particular have is if they end up getting shot a few times, some of their abilities will essentially scale based off their health. Same thing as berserkers. A lot of classes have that. So that's why you bring 2 or 3 squads to go assassinate them before the fight even really gets going. Or in the case that they're, let's say, a phalanx that happens to have some griffins in the background, that's when you bring the casters instead, essentially just to break down that defense first and then go deal with the rest. But again, there's a lot more strategy than simply re-rolling stuff in those situations. So we went through a few of these rando fights. We did get somewhat clobbered in this particular scenario, but eventually got through it. But let's go ahead and advance forward here a little ways. So I went through clearing out the entire island. There was this cool map here where there was kind of these archers that would keep showing up with support abilities and firing from towers and things like that. It was just a cool scenario, really fun set piece fight there. If you were fighting this in a more standard sense, I would imagine this would be pretty darn satisfying. Let's see, then just went around rebuilding everything, doing the mining minigame a little bit. There was some of these guys that were using traps that was kind of amusing. Had to go and just basically buy out everything, as you do. Just wanted to get out of a place filled with this many elves as soon as possible, dang it. There's way too much anime going on here. We gotta get out of here. Okay. finally found a journal to get the treasure map to go get more well, more king weapons, as it were. Let's see, travel, travel, travel. For a second there, I thought that they were talking about Chloe with this conversation, but they're talking about this lady that's about to pull some shenanigans. Yes, yes, she's talking, doing the whole anime thing, and she ends up killing on here. Where was it? I think it was here-ish. See, when this first happened, I was thinking bullshit because, like, how is she taking on several squads at one time? But it's, yeah, it is kind of bullshit. But yeah, it's supposed to be Arrow Rain, except I don't think her class actually gets Arrow Rain, so that's just kind of a weird one. Somehow she accomplishes that. Who knows how? But she didn't ever get used on the team specifically for that reason, because that is some nonsense. Like, on that, I would have to say that, like, yeah, that kind of stuff does legitimately bug me. Like, just use the abilities you have, dang it. Give her some support standard archers that actually have that rain ability, have the have the elves there showing up with their support abilities instead. And like 3 of those, and then have an archer as the main one, and then they all fire. They use their arrow rain. It's boosted. Maybe clump up those enemies more so that they're actually getting, shot at in that one particular situation. Um, Weird detail. Moving on. Let's see, more fixing things, more looting, as you do. Found the black market guy. And then, yeah, went back to go fill out the atlas, as you do. But, like, even if there are easier fights, there's still so much frickin' stuff going on. Alright, so this lady ends up going and upgrading our whole ring situation there. As a little bit of a detail, it's interesting that they actually bothered modeling the ring. They actually didn't necessarily need to do that. Just cool little detail. And yeah, this part is kind of funny to me because she's very, very blatantly kind of hinting like, oh, you gotta go find somebody to go get married. Hint, hint. I'm right here, looking barely dressed. What's on your mind? Kind of situation. Also, they're basically saying that the penalty for divorce is the apocalypse, so that's very red state of you. But let's go ahead and continue on. So I was considering to go try the actual endgame fights at this point, but I figured now that we've cleared out the Elf Island, let's go see how much of a difference it actually made for this fight. Because if folks were correct, then clearly, going through this whole thing would have given so many overpowered items and so many extra levels and things like that, that it's just now a complete cakewalk. And no, it was basically a slightly different thing from before. The momentum squads still were momentum squads. The cavalry squads were still cavalry squads. The main upgrade that we had gotten since all this time was that all the extra honor points were just used to finally expand many of the main squads up to 5 people. That was the main advantage that we ended up getting. A lot of those new builds, new items, and whatever else changed a few builds around slightly. It added some new little options, like upgrading this Scorpion squad over here to the point where they were generally better at fighting things like scouts, could at least stall them a little bit. That one ended up getting rebuilt a few more times, but still, it still was holding up, is what I'm trying to get across here. That going to the easier area and collecting all of that extra stuff expanded options, but it expanded it sideways, not vertically, So yeah. So this one actually ended up being the second, probably second most epic of the bunch in terms of scale here. So ended up going for just a different approach. Honestly, this is something that I could have done with the initial setup as well. But sent Elaine and the Griffin Aces to go take the town in the north, to go delay reinforcements from there. Essentially, I had one squad always permanently situated in the middle of the map to keep grinding away on these guys that kept coming out, but they still kept getting overwhelmed by chip damage. So it ended up being a squad of multiple units, or basically just an entire... I guess technically they were platoon size by the end, of various different unit types, as well as items and whatever else, just trying to hold that center as much as possible. It's actually interesting that they give you that one campsite there. It feels like it's specifically there to help you deal with the bear squads. So that felt really nice. Just one of those nice little nod from the dev moments. There we go. Yeah, their defenses are all pretty thoroughly crushed at this point, so they're not holding up against the bear squads as well as they used to. They will down the road. Needed more priority on Beast Slayer on what's his face, Berserker guy over there, or Viking rather. Anyway, all right. So yeah, they all end up doing their thing there. Cavalry ends up trying to assist with that town on the right. It's about to be nightfall, so everyone's about to start zooming around the map all over the place. Like, it feels great. I know I keep saying it, but it feels great. The number of different mechanics going on, the number of different builds going on, the way that it all just plays against itself in different ways, it's very nice. And like this is the nice thing about that quote unquote, oh no, the RNG, it's just RNG bullshit equation here. Like the actual difference wasn't that the fight was getting re-rolled. The actual difference was that the defender was there to go protect the cleric, who then had an opening to do more healing. That it's effectively a slight change as far as that goes. Or if you update their tactics to go specifically target down one unit, or if you're standing on a base, maybe change some of their loadouts to go to allow for an emergency change or something. There's a huge advantage on units that are holding a stronghold because they're able to go and swap out their equipment. So like I have had situations where like in a pinch, I ended up going and just as a complete Hail Mary, 9 times out of 10 this doesn't work, but I ended up just throwing a bunch of crit items on everybody, and it barely let them survive. Or in other situations, we ended up using our items like right there with a camping set. If it wasn't for that camping set, this still wouldn't have happened. If it wasn't for a technical win, then it still wouldn't have happened. And this is with again twice the item limit of the higher difficulty, which is again what's got me super excited for it. Or I actually saw one complaint the other day over, oh, my predictions aren't accurate because I get there and my damage is wildly different. It's like, it doesn't account for support fire. It's just counting for unit on unit. So, like, in this particular case, they were getting targeted by an arbalest, which they still had enough potential to push through there. But if those arbalests had managed to kill off anybody, that would just basically nuke their damage down to nothing. But again, there's always more. There's always kind of more to it. Or even things like having the points to be able to deploy additional squads or something. Sure, on paper, you've got your own like personal ace squads that you've gone and customized and whatever else, but you'll notice that there's a lot of use of mercenaries over the course of this fight to essentially stretch beyond what we're normally able to do. That you could make the argument over, oh, you're just overpowering something with a meat wall or something, and sure, to some extent, kind of, but that is still a valid strategy to just essentially send a flyer in with a mercenary in the team, use 3 points to then go summon 3 archer supports, and if there's a bunch of casters in the back, then yes, that is a strategy. It is a strategy game. That you're essentially calling in a bunch of archers to deal with the casters, or casters or archers or what have you, before the fight starts, so that all of your numbers and hard hits and whatever else can go straight towards the front line, which no longer has, let's say, a druid to support them or something like that. Like that's brilliant. That's really, really damn good design. So over the course of this entire fight, and I'm kind of running short on time here, so I'm going to go skip ahead a little bit. But we ended up taking the town in the north, sending out the occasional mercenaries, sending out occasional groups to kind of scout out the forests because there were a bunch of ambushes up north. Ended up tried using the griffins to go take the north by itself, but the ace squad ended up getting completely annihilated when they tried. In a lot of cases, they were getting out by the skin of their teeth and then leaving to go kind of recuperate at a town somewhere. We've got again basically a similar scenario over here where one squad's sitting and healing, the other squads are trying to get at least one kill off on these turbo scouts here, in order to then allow somebody else to step in and actually get the kill. Because as soon as one piece falls on these scouts, they no longer really have the means to continue defending. So like as you see right here, as soon as they lose one, that is their entire evasion wall basically gone. So as soon as you break one wheel off the car, it suddenly starts falling on its face, as it were. So this was the moment when I started realizing that you could actually swap people's equipment around when you were standing on a stronghold. That you could change their equipment at will, which actually allowed them to win a fight because a lifeblood pendant was enough to give them just enough health to barely survive an encounter for somebody else to step in and kind of do the job for them. And again, bear in mind that while we could make the argument over predictability or unpredictability or what have you, this is something that people regularly think about, and they tell you to think about when, like, for example, you're learning to fight or something like that. It's like you predict, think how everything can potentially benefit you in some way. Like, think how you can potentially abuse everything around you. Like, do you potentially remember ever seeing old timey sword masters and things like that, and how they carried a cloak around, and how it's like, oh look, they're just pompous assholes. Why are they always carrying cloaks around? Because those cloaks were a defensive option. That if somebody got ambushed and they didn't have any other weapon on hand, there were entire techniques around being able to defend yourself using just a cloak and a dagger. That was one of those just kind of cool historical things. It's like just look up cloak fighting at some point if you're ever curious, because it's kind of fascinating how good it could be. Because they were basically just made of thick cloth that would be used to bind a weapon, steal somebody else's weapon, and what have you, without being the one that carried a sword around. Because if in certain areas you just couldn't, even if that was somebody's job. But if somebody found a way to, for example, they were allowed to carry around a knife for self-defense and, had a cloak on them, now you have essentially a sword and board set up with more flexibility that's allowed in more areas. Just one of those kind of interesting notes there. But it's a similar mentality here where everything is potentially something more than it initially seems. And that's what always makes a good strategy game in my eyes. Anyways, so little by little, we are trying to push forward here. Kept getting pushed back upon going forward anywhere. Kept getting taken out upon trying to take that tower. They still kept sending werewolves and scouts down from the bottom, and making any advances during the night was a bit difficult. Because even with a complete hard counter squad, they still kept getting completely taken out with vitality issues. That they would just simply get too tired. And if we used Vitalize and Toughness, they might be able to make it, but it still would not give them the points back to be able to completely push through entirely on their own. Um, and we had these other squads again as just kind of a little bit of a bulwark here for going and taking hits as needed. Brought in some additional mercenaries to potentially deal with one of those lucky attacks whenever needed. But again, we're planning for logistics, and that feels awesome. I love logistics in games like this. So little by little, I started pushing forward. I kept using flyers to try to scout out the north, try to deal with everything in the woods, so we wouldn't get jumped anymore. But again, little by little, I swapped it out for Lenore here rather than my usual flyer squad. This is the Freezy squad. It was seemingly better for dealing with the kind of lower end enemies, as it were. But the AI was adapting this whole time. So earlier we were talking about how the AI would send out their scouts to go deal with your flyers. In this case, they actually are sending the scouts and werewolves out to different locations depending on who's defending them. So they are still attempting to adapt to things on the fly in a soft manner, but I'm hoping we'll see different stuff coming out in TZ there. They are still going to be charging in one at a time, as you do. They do occasionally clump up. They certainly make up for this in the next map after this. But yeah, they just keep on charging and charging and charging, and that gives us more points to potentially work with. But we don't have the mobility to kind of escape out of this trap right now. We're kind of pinned in place. And this is one of those things that reminds me of a lot of those XCOM mods that are out there, because you'll have those moments where you are deliberately, made to be overpowered, but only right now for right now, right here in this situation. So, like, if anybody ever watched any of the X Division videos and things like that, there were entire sections where it was like, okay, we got guys in extremely heavy armor that are using battle axes to technically bypass armor, that are able to very effectively deal with a lot of the enemies that we're running into. We've got stun gas launchers on everyone's back to just deal with entire crowds of units at once. And it was a very effective strategy until it wasn't. That it still had cases where they were really bad on the offense, as in like they were really bad at taking bases with that particular strategy. In terms of like if the other guy ended up being too far away, it was a bit of a problem. there was minimal friendly fire because it was basically stun gas, but there was still this constant issue that if somebody misfired, it could potentially wipe out the entire team. Um, there were issues where like yeah they could run into an entire room, take a whole ton of damage, just like use shields. Those shields get shredded off. They switch over to their armor. That armor ends up taking a lot of hits for them, and just due to sequence breaking, we were really overpowered for a little while. And I was saying that at the time, like it felt like we had kind of broken the game, but this feels really good. And that's basically exactly what had happened. That we had temporarily broken it due to a sequence break, and then the dev of the mod was kind of reaching out at the time, like, yeah, no, this is entirely intentional. Like, you did good on a sequence break. Congratulations, you get the rewards for it. And then as soon as it got to the next phase, like those guys were just getting dropped like flies left and right. There was a very dramatic terror mission in one of those where just a lot of the aces ended up getting wounded and having to be carried to the dropship, and like the best guy in the team manages to secure the very last kill there, and then just bleeds out on the ground as he did so. Like man, that Iron Man run was so much fun. But like it creates these dramatic highs and lows, you know. Um, so that's always good. That's always nice to see. Um, but the reason that I've typically been recommending challenge runs to folks that still insisted on saying that they needed a higher difficulty specifically for them was, well, because those challenge runs are effectively that difficulty already. They make you encounter different mechanics. Just stick to a single class. There you go. Stick to unpromoted units. There you go. It's already making you do different stuff. Um, and suddenly the entire kind of quote unquote meta of everything shifts. Like I have seen one guy that was saying that it was still too easy with ultra promoted units and whatever else. I was like, I wonder what's actually going on there. Is that a real story? Is that somebody showing off? I don't know. There's no way to really know in a lot of these cases. But, anyways, I gotta give this a little bit of a break for the moment, and I'll be right back to finish it. You probably won't notice anything on your end. I was thinking in terms of if they did add another difficulty, there is a right way to go about it. So, as I mentioned before, adding too many levels just dilutes the system and also just gives those levels to the player. It wouldn't really help anything. Trying to simply nerf items wouldn't necessarily be the thing either, but this has been tried. It has been done before in terms of March of the Black Queen. The way that they tried to deal with getting meta items early is a randomizer mode. So effectively, if they did something along those lines, I think it could potentially help out quite a ways for dealing with those situations. Now, originally I was thinking maybe a Resident Evil style arrange mode based on difficulty, but not only would that probably be a lot more difficult, it also would just lead to the usual, oh, here's just the meta routes that you gotta take every single time, and then you get the angry posts coming out immediately after, like, oh, this is what I have to do because it's the optimal thing, and I have to play optimally at all times, or else, I don't know, friggin' God's gonna step on me or something. Like, I'll never understand that mentality of you gotta do everything perfect all the time, but either way, it is what it is. I mean, honestly, it's one of those things that I would have thought that I probably would have been instilled with myself, considering that I had a one of those strict parents that would constantly tell you that you suck. But either way, like specifically, not even just in a beneficial way, just a wow, you just suck, and then leaves leaves the room kind of situation. Like every problem is your fault kind of deal. Anyway, so was retooling the strategy here at this point. So basically, cavalry hit and runs were the name of the game here, because there were a lot of things that were going and defending the main squad here. He does have a hell of a lot of support there, hell of a lot of defenses to him, and actually managing to kind of crack through with even the flyer squad. We'll eventually get there, but we had to get rid of all of his support first. Actually, in a little bit of a funny twist, that we ended up getting so many kills off with the Flyer Squad that they had a far easier time cracking through once all was said and done. But either way, that's a story for later. So eventually, I tried sending Elaine to go take on Mr. Wizardman. Didn't quite work out. He just ended up getting bogged down by werewolves and scouts because apparently they saw him coming. So yeah, he ended up getting stuck over there. This just led to a weird moment of desperation as I'm trying to scramble to get all of the other teams to suddenly deal with this onslaught of units everywhere. So we were sending out mercenaries to try to kind of curb off some of their health. So mercenary archers are actually really really handy at dealing with scouts in terms of like just wounding them enough that you can basically spend 1 point to more or less guarantee a win for a low B squad. So kind of a useful tech there. Kept running into this here where they were just barely surviving until eventually I just ended up leaving Yana's squad there on that one stronghold instead of doing this rotation thing, because they finally got consistent enough that they were just barely getting enough health back, courtesy of the healing wheel, to actually be able to consistently take wins like 90% of the time. They still would get the occasional moment where they would get lucky and take them out, and I did have at least one restart due to accidentally just hitting start out of overconfidence. Like, oh wait, hold on, why did they die? Because stuff's gonna happen, that's why. Because they will occasionally have those moments where just one of them does exceptionally well. But if they do a randomizer mode, I would kind of hope that they would employ something that the Felseal did in terms of just adding additional accessories to random enemies. Just like throw them out here and there, just to occasionally give you interesting stuff. Like there were moments in Felseal where like you could do a really cheesy strategy by let's say leaving your game on the Switch, and then just repeatedly throwing people through training fights to overlevel, or not training fights, but just on away missions to overlevel your people and give them a bunch of classes they wouldn't normally have access to, and then you cheese this to be able to win some of the early hunt missions that you're not supposed to be able to do yet. In order to then have access to something like a Phoenix early on, which is a unit that would self-destruct and re-raise itself. So it self-destructs, hits everything on the map based on proximity, but it's able to re-raise itself. And the thing is, that's potentially a very cheesy thing if you overpower those enough. But with that being said, it was also a situation where you would occasionally just run into randos that are like, I brought fire shields along, I don't know what to tell you, this does absolutely nothing, did you bring anything else? And then suddenly your cheesy strategy means nothing. So having that bit of randomization may address a lot of those difficulty concerns for, you know, the folks that maybe are bragging a bit too hard. I'm still skeptical of just how many of those are actually accurate stories, but either way, you know, everyone's at a different place. Everyone plays for different reasons. Like, you'll have some folks that will obsess over min-maxing every little drop out of every single unit. I know personally, I'm all in it for the challenge runs because I just like seeing the weird, underutilized mechanics and just interesting use cases for them. You know, that's kind of my main interest in all of this stuff. That, like I said, one of the things I'm looking forward to is a soldier-only run because, yeah, I just want to see all the stuff you can do with just your basic grunts. Like just the fact that they can revive, that they can deal with ranged units with javelins, that there's multiple types of javelins, that we've got a lot of different types of different spears for dealing with different situations. It would be an interesting thing to play around with. So, you know, looking forward to that. I would imagine the sellsword only run will be incredibly fun, just due to friggin' summon mechanics all the time. It's good stuff, man. I love the summon system here. So. So yeah, ultimately, they ended up getting tired out before reaching this bottom town, because I was looking at the prediction, it was saying that they would be able to take them on, but they were having some difficulties, that some of the support was still there, so I wound up in this awkward situation where they were basically toast. They just managed to barely survive past the archer squads. They were supposed to go take out everything that was there, but they weren't quite enough to get the job done. So they barely survived. The mercenaries managed to take the town, but we don't have anybody to take the CP. I can't afford to let him rest yet, because if I do, then they're potentially running into a bit of trouble there. I was like, let's go ahead and test this around a little bit, because we finally got to another self-imposed checkpoint. So at this point, you know, like, okay, let's see what happens if we let him rest. We send the mercenaries out. They get hilariously battered around. Scouts come in. Scouts get taken out. What all ended up happening here? I don't remember. I think that might have been that moment where I ended up having to restart there due to accidentally pressing start. But yeah, eventually they get past their tiredness, eventually they manage to take that tile. But again, even though they are hard countering everything that's there, they are still on the back foot due to the constant reinforcements. They're still in this position where we don't have any items to go revive anybody. All we can really do is shuffle and rearrange stuff. Again, bear in mind, we are directly countering them. There's not many counters that are as good as Beast Slayer. that it is directly shutting down a lot of their offense. But at this point, these squads are. It's basically the Landsknecht that's the problem. That the Landsknecht survives, and if the squad is injured, they don't have enough to get past their high guard rate and things like that. So that's why units are starting to crumble to those guys. So end up sending out the Lobies where I would have used the mercenaries before, to just go and finish off this one Landsknecht here, even though they're again about half the level of this guy, of this lady rather. Yeah, one of the cool looking knights that I have but never utilize. Anyway, so also I only realized after the fact that I just had Joseph benched this whole time. I didn't even realize it. But again, we're just spending this entire time picking stuff apart and recreating these different teams in different ways. This, even after all of the additional benefits of all the elf stuff and whatever else, this was still a really really fascinating fight. That sure, most of the stuff was stuff that we could have done before going there, and it wouldn't have been too much different. But still, like, it just goes to show that it adds options, but it adds them sideways. It doesn't necessarily serve as a straight vertical jump. The main thing that made any amount of difference was the 5-man squad thing, and the main 5-man squad that we're using was already there with Elaine's team here. So this went on for quite some time. Eventually, we managed to hold that one city in the south long enough to actually get his entire team up to scratch. But even then, I have a feeling they actually may speed up their reinforcement count depending on how they're doing, because it felt like at this point that they still were having a hard time keeping up with everything, even though they had less reinforcements that were seemingly being sent out. We didn't have to worry about the werewolf squads anymore, but these guys just kept coming. There was just all scouts all day, absolutely everywhere. See your usual post-game trash war in AoE 2. Just scouts for days. They would barely survive. We would get life aid going. They would barely be able to take a win, and then hope that they can hopefully get everything back up to scratch before the next wave shows up. And it's very difficult to do during the night because they show up faster and faster. So they eventually start sending people out to try and... Oh yeah, that was when the timer ran out. They eventually start sending people out to try to take the towns in the north there. Again, just feels like the AI is adapting in specific situations, just not being as aggressive as you'd... Well, honestly, I'm kind of glad about them not being super aggressive here. So we went for a different approach now of... Elaine wouldn't be able to actually keep himself up and running if he were to go take the town up north by himself. The Flyers can't really put much of a dent in it. So the plan was to attack from both sides and then use the cleric hidden in the woods to go and help with their healing situation. And that felt extremely satisfying. And then right here, we had a moment where I was using one of the Lobie squads to try to scout out the woods, to try to bait out one of the ambush units that was hiding there. So we had a situation where they were running away just barely fast enough to stay out of range, using a heavy swing to actually keep them at bay. It's just one of those fun little, just random moments, Like, it didn't necessarily... There was no condition on stats or whatever else. It was just a pure map interaction kind of experience, but it felt very satisfying to keep stuff at bay with something like a heavy swing. And at this point, they end up just barely getting there on time to go take this guy out. And even then, like, this is why we wanted to hurt that ambush squad and pull them out of there, because they would just immediately run out and go deal with the Flyers that I was sending out in that direction. But again, it just keeps going and going and going. Just always more stuff to play around with. And even still at this point, where they seemingly were meat grinding these guys like nobody's business, they still ended up needing more help from the other squads. So eventually we end up breaking through. We end up getting to the north. Mercenaries end up assisting quite a bit in that. And then finally the Flyers end up getting a good angle on Ryman here, who gets completely dunked on. Cool music on this fight, though. Kind of made me think of what was it, the friggin' Nibeth's theme by any other name. But yeah, lots of back and forth with the bears. She looks cool. He's got his bullshit shield, as you do. ended up getting a hell of a lot of attacks off that Landsknecht. They get a lot of moves. All right, so it takes a couple of runs, but we eventually get through it and end up getting to 129. So 129 on the kill count. So the second most kind of death-prone thing. This was, again, another one of those moments of, like, I wish they would stop letting the bad guy get away. Like, friggin' Unifi over here, just shoot the guy. Just, what are you doing? Just shoot him right now. It ends up working out in a cooler way, but still, just shoot him. Like, what are you doing? She's always defending the lion. Surprisingly enough, that actually kind of sort of makes sense later, but we'll get to that. Anyway, one random fight on the way over. More just kind of random stuff going on here. And then we get to this one, dude. This one? This one was cool. Okay, so this is technically the other big fight of Baxtoria here. We're gonna skip past some plot stuff there, but okay. So we do what we were planning to do. I take a look. I see that the flyers can actually hurt the boss there. We're gonna have them go on a big circuitous route around the entire map, do the old PS1 March of the Black Queen approach here, and then we're just gonna have the counter beast squad sitting and holding. Well, sitting and holding for the most part. They have catapults on the HQ, so they have to hop out every now and then. But still, you know, they're going to be able to use the healing wheel to more or less keep up. But it takes absolutely ages to get around the map, so they're holding off for quite a decently long time. Now, up to this point, they're sending basically just the usual reinforcements, right? Now, have you ever seen Willard by any chance? Did you notice that our leader guy is a were-rat or were-mouse or something? He's basically Matthias from Redwall, I guess. But anyway, so they're going to go ahead and withdraw now. Actually, surprisingly enough, they do explain the where-everything thing, just not in the way I expected. Look at this shit. Okay? So now they'll send out more and more and more units, right? They send out additional support for each of their HQs, and they specifically tell you, yeah, dude, it is time to hunker down, because stuff's about to get real. Because this is already a ton. Like they're sending out shitloads of units, but at this point they're sending squads out like 3-4 at a time. just to try to run you down. If you don't have a specific like hyper defensive squad, you're probably getting completely smushed. Like just that whole thing of like, yeah, if you try to play more aggressive here, you're probably gonna have a bad time. Ultimately, the bird approach did end up kind of sort of working out. They actually did pull another ambush in a moment, because surprisingly they did prepare for this too, at which they had an kind of anti-flyer ambush squad here with 2 swordmasters, a caster, and 2 owls. Just kind of sit and parry things, but effectively right before the finish line, they have this ambush squad pop out of the woods. It turns out owls can fly, by the way. I didn't realize that was even a thing, and then they just suddenly fly out of the mountains like, you know, surprise, motherfucker, we're right here. So after a few runs, they end up winning that fight, but they end up needing to take a little bit of a heal break. Thankfully, they are kind of nice about it. This is your victory lap map, after all. So you got your defensive squad you've probably been using since the last map. I start bringing out support squads at this point in order to just keep up with the tide of meat. Seriously, look at this shit, dude. Oh, man. They just keep coming. So, like, it's comical how many units they send at you. Honestly, as much as we're recruiting them to our side, it feels like there should be nothing left of the Bestrels after our warpath here. But what's nice is that they are, again, just kind of nice about it. They give you a big old cash bonus for surviving that fight with your flyers. They give you a healing rain right next to it, so you can just basically set up an entire healing rain so you don't have to spend the time recovering. Like, you can tell that was a design moment of, like, we knew exactly what you were going to do here. You know what? You'll be rewarded for it. So you set up a healing rain, you go charge this guy in, and eventually, you know, just kind of wear him down. Because you do have infinite healing at that point. You're basically immortal. So just called in the mercenaries, and yeah, then they just kind of steamrolled that party. Let's go ahead and continue on here. Skip through some plot events so we don't spoil much. Anyway, I don't even know why I recorded those, because that's just straight up nothing but spoilers. So, okay. So at this point, we're how many hours in? Like 50 something hours into the game here, right? So the next place that I wanted to get to was Albion. That's the final island. Honestly, I don't even know how the hell to get there yet. I've heard some folks say that it was based on the number of shards you submitted, but I've already submitted like I think 500 of them, so I don't know what you're supposed to do there. But you get so many items upon completing this place that it is insane. You get your two red boosts, your two blue boosts. You get more magic bombs for just destroying whatever you'd like. Um, it's interesting that you got the Twilight Cloak over here, but the Dusk Cloak back in the Elf place. Um, finally an item to change the day and night. So finally you get the item to basically beat all the Bestial stuff at the point that you've actually gone and beaten them. I think you could probably get that item earlier. I would assume you could, but it's just kind of cool that it's there. Oh yeah, I think was this the General's Pike moment or the Canyon Lance moment? There was some moment here where I found a better spear for Renault, and it just ended up finally being the key to crack one of the side quests here. Was it the Pike? I guess it was the Pike. Where it seemed like basically the same thing as a different weapon, but it was just switching it from blue to red, which I guess was the main difference maker. And yeah, it turns out there was finally a reason to use all these red shiny rocks from earlier to get all kinds of like special pieces of equipment. I'm sure that guy would like to be relevant and be on the team at some point, but he is simply too edgy. Ain't gonna happen. And yeah, then the exploration commenced, and then the rebuilding stuff commenced, and all of that. Ultimately, though, what I just want to get at here is, even past oh yeah, wait, we're already circling back in terms of videos here. Even once all was said and done here, even after doing that whole Elf Island and stuff like that, it opened up options, but it didn't leave anything super overpowered. It seems like the one thing that people are complaining about, the one sequence break that they're cheesing about, is that whatever this Coliseum thing is needs to potentially be harder. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. But anyways, I'll report on that one when I get there. But personally, as far as I see it, the difficulty is perfectly where it should be. And from what I know of the TZ difficulty, I'm really looking forward to it because it sounds like as perfect of a difficulty as you could get in a setting like this, in a just overall system like this. It feels like they were aware of the shortcomings, they were aware of the things that it could and couldn't do, and well, made a difficulty accordingly. Adding new levels to something wouldn't necessarily make it better, and in a lot of cases could just plain make it worse. But anyway, so that's about that. I know it was a bit of a disjointed one as usual, but I'm still playing through this whole thing and absolutely loving the hell out of it. This is easily one of my favorite strategy games in years. So anyways, that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care. Thank you for stopping by, and let me know what you would do for a difficulty. Would you like to do a arrange mode? Would you like them to do a randomizer mode? Are you one of those that insists that the level system will somehow work? Or do you just add more units everywhere? Because, like, I mean, they already have maps where they add extra units for extra difficulty. It's cool, but it's more of a situational thing. I feel like everything is very tailor-built as far as units go. I personally think just adding random accessories every now and then as a toggleable option, I think that would sort out a lot of those issues. And apparently now we have a traffic cone. Let's go ahead and go back several things here. Whoops. Don't do the stuff. Okay, whatever. Here we go. We got some in the background. Anyway, so, y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.